Okay, so again, welcome everybody. It's so nice to see you. Happy Friday. My name is Lisa Unangst. I'm an assistant professor of higher education leadership at SUNY Empire State. I'm here together with Roy Chan, who will introduce himself in just a moment. We are so excited to be co-sponsoring this brown bag event. I am here representing the Global Migration SIG attached to the Comparative and International Education Society. Our speaker today is Dr. Ting Huang, and I'd like to just offer a brief bio. She is a tenure-track assistant professor from the College of William and Mary. She has a number of years of teaching experiences for multilingual language learners as a college instructor on different campuses. She studied marginalized Asian Americans, video learning, and bilingual learning in her graduate years and in her dissertation. Her research interests include international education, teacher training, diversity, and educational technology. She is a meeting associate and a unit planner for SIES for the annual meeting this year, 2023, and also serves in the secretary role for our Global Migration SIG. So I'll turn it over to Roy, and then we'll begin with our presentations.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And first off, I also want to thank CIES Global Migration SIG, as well as everyone who's attending this inaugural brown bag event. This event is an opportunity to foster collaboration with our special interest group within our society, as well as to encourage networking opportunities of our current researchers and emerging scholars within our special interest group. My name is Roy Y. Chan. I currently serve as the chair for the CIES Study Abroad and International Student SIG. We are also a pretty new SIG within the society. We started it in 2018, and we're now one of the fastest growing SIG with now approximately 150 plus members who are conducting both formal and informal research in international student mobility, in study abroad, as well as other issues with globalization and internationalization of higher education. We're very thrilled and honored to have Ashley Watson, who was one of our recipients of our SAIS research grant from spring 2022, to give an updated analysis of her current research entitled Racialized Experiences of International Black African Collegians. Ashley is finishing up her doctoral work at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, specializing in international and intercultural education. Some of her research interests has mostly focused on educational access and equity, intercultural education, interfaith dialogue, gender equality, as well as prison reform. She has been an active member of AERA, NAFSA, as well as some of the associations tied to international education. So we're very thrilled and honored to have Ashley come in and give her presentation and to share some with us about how she has been advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in international education. So without further ado, we'll have Ashley begin to share her slides.
All right, give me one moment while I get this set up.
And I forgot to mention, if you want to ask any questions throughout the presentation from both Ashley as well as the second presenter, feel free to write it on the chat, and we're happy to come back and answer some of those questions you may have throughout the webinar this afternoon. Thank you.
All right, is my screen visible to all now?
It's
Yes.
still loading. Oh, I'm seeing some.
Loading. Okay. Oh, well, I have to press resume share to resume the share. So
Got it.
Okay,
Got it
there
now,
we go. All right. Well, again, thank you everyone for being here today. I will just jump right in. I've already been introduced, so I'll skip that part and just start the presentation. So yes, my research is about the racialized experiences of international Black African collegians. And throughout the presentation, I will refer to them as IBAC. I may also use the acronym BUSA, which stands for Black US American, which represents people like me who can only trace their lineage to the southern roots of the transatlantic slave trade. So in my paper, I start by providing an overview of student mobility trends. I discuss the push-pull factors of African student mobility, such as overcrowded universities, competitive entrance exams, infrastructure limitations, and academic turnover. These concerns, along with the growing middle class across the continent, have contributed to an increase of African students studying in the US. And while there is substantial growth, African students still comprise a relatively small percentage of the total international student population at around 4%. All of this contributes to a dichotomy of invisibility and hypervisibility among IBAC. The invisibility emanates from being outnumbered on college campuses, even amongst other international students. At the same time, they're hypervisible at predominantly white institutions, which all of my participants had attended. I argue that this duality results in IBAC being underconsidered and as a result, largely absent from research pertaining to international students. IBAC are also misunderstood as university officials and programmers often conflate Black African and Black American student experiences. Lumping together BUSA and IBAC, I believe, based on racial characteristics, disregard distinct national, ethnic, and cultural identities each group brings to US universities. All of this leads me to my primary research question, which is how are IBAC making sense and meaning of their racialized experiences in US higher education? And I just want to take this time to say thank you again to the Study Abroad and International Student SIG for supporting me with the grant that I was able to use to recruit my participants and transcribe the interview. It wouldn't have been done at this time without that support. So I am very grateful. I used a total of 10 participant accounts in my final study. So for those of you who like graphs, not me, but for those of you who like graphs, this is for you. Of the 10 participants, 4 of them came from Western Africa. That would be Nigeria and Ghana. 4 of them also came from Southern Africa, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. And 2 came from the Eastern region, Kenya and Ethiopia. I would say half of my participants had been in the US between 5 to 6 years. 2 has been here longer than 6 years, and only 1 participant has been here less than a year. And at the time I interviewed them, they had been in the US for under 6 months. And I do think that this is really important. I had a total of 3 master's students and 7 doctoral students, and 3 males, and the rest were female. I used interpretive phenomenological analysis to analyze my data, IPA. IPA is concerned about individual accounts. So it's not, the goal isn't to make generalizable statements, but to understand the lived experiences of my participants. So that's what the ideographic means. It's a double hermeneutic, meaning that I am making sense of my participants making sense of their lived experience. And therefore it is a meaning and sense-making form of analysis. I am pleased to say that the tentative findings that I presented in April are consistent with the latter data. I'll share 3 of the major themes now, but there are more. The first is that my participants are puzzled by the US obsession with race. And here I have pulled out some quotes from the transcripts. I'll read the first one. And this was from Anike, who is a participant from Nigeria. She said, I have a problem with why do I actually even have to put my race on a form in the first instance? And this was a question many of my participants brought up. I asked them if they remembered the first time they had to check their race, and all but one participant remembers that exact moment. And for them, it didn't make sense. Even my participant from South Africa has never had to fill out a form like that. My participants talk about becoming more cautious and conscious and careful about their actions. That race is now always in the back of their mind. There is a general annoyance by the US fixation on race. What this means for me is that my participants did not have an issue identifying as Black, but they didn't understand why their skin color could determine the services and the outcome of those services. Race specification is something so normal and ingrained in US society, but to have people ask us why and not really have an answer, to me is very interesting. And so race matters because we make it matter in the US. Another theme was that there is a new mental load that my participants are now carrying. There is this racial anxiety that they have to deal with and understanding how to navigate these spaces. The growing body of literature regarding IBAC has examined the emotionally taxing work that international students face dealing with pertinent matters such as visa status, finances, family life back home, and academics, while learning how to traverse racial hierarchies in the US. Campuses around the US are now talking about wellness and mental health. More research is being done about mental health of Asian American and Asian international students now due to COVID, and rightfully so. But universities should understand that mental health has always mattered for all international students, all people, and at all time. I do want to pull out one of the final quote I have here, where the participant is comparing infant mortality and maternal mortality in Zimbabwe to the US. And it goes beyond just being concerned about academics and their life in the US in terms of their education, but outside of education, whether this is going to the doctor or going to the bank or getting a loan or getting any kind of assistance, they are concerned about this new thing. Another participant mentioned feeling sick and not wanting to not go to class because she didn't want her professor to think she was lazy, because one of the stigmas is that Black people are lazy. Another one, and this is the point that I'm still struggling to articulate in my write-up, and so I will read out some of these quotes. The first one says, I see myself as a human being. All these issues about discrimination and all those kind of things, if some of us want to be worried about this, we'll never be happy. I don't know. Will it ever end? It can only improve, but will it ever end? I mean, that racism, inferiority, superiority complex thing is like innate kind of thing in human beings. This was Kwesi, the gentleman who has only been here for 6 months at the time of the interview. Another participant said, if you yourself already have that bias that people are going to react to you negatively because you're Black, then definitely you are also the problem. Even if I have to be timid, even if I have to just swallow my pride and take the streets, I try to do that rather than raise an uproar, because at times you can't prove it. The person doesn't say it out, so you can't prove that this person's actions is because of this. So I just try not to make that assumption at all. And in this passage, she's talking about she doesn't ever consider anything to be a racial bias. And then the final quote, I identify myself in Christ. And I began saying to myself, if God wants to make me great, he will make me great. No white person or Black person, no one can stop me. So that was when I woke up from my sleep. And this participant was reflecting on the state of, in her mind, the state of Black Americans in the US and the fact that so many of us are sleeping because we're concerned about racial prejudice. And so I share these because first I want to say that international students have power, they are agentic, and they have different ways of coping. And opting out is one of those ways of coping. And by opting out, I mean, they are choosing not to participate in this racial discourse. They are choosing to see it differently than perhaps I would. And so the first comment, as I mentioned, was made by Kwesi, who had only been in the US for 6 months. The second was from Nyashma, who has been here for 2 years. And the final statement was from Margaret, who has been in the US for over 6 years. The latter two discussed their faith throughout the interview. But what's interesting to me is that racial fatigue led to Margaret being suicidal before seeking help. And so now she tells all international students that she meets that they should be seeing a therapist. But at the same time, she believes that it is overstated. And so I add these details because the treatment of African students in China during COVID and in Europe at the start of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, for me, challenges this idea of opting out. And I wonder if they're truly transcending racial discourse, or if this is a form of mental detachment as a way of self-preservation. And I don't know. I don't know yet. So what I just shared are similarities across participant accounts, but there are other areas of divergence. But I want to mention a few sub-themes that are not likely to make it into my final account, but I do want to share. So location matters. All of my participants studying in Minnesota expressed fear and a heightened racial anxiety. And this is likely because in the past 6 years, there have been 4 highly publicized cases of police violence, fatal police violence. Philando Castile in 2016, George Floyd in 2020, Daunte Wright in 2021, and Amir Locke this past February. Now, for those of us who are involved in intercultural education, Minneapolis is also a hub of a number of different institutions and initiatives that really push forward this whole idea of internationalization and interculturalism. So it's not lost on me that these two things are coexisting. Another interesting sub-theme was that several of my participants changed their career trajectory as a direct result of their racialization. One of my participants, after learning she's in the sciences, after learning what she would have to go through to achieve her initial goal, both changed her major and changed her career trajectory because for her, she wasn't sure if it was worth it. Now, I am going to put a shameless plug. Career development is not in my research agenda, but I thought this was a very interesting finding. And so if that is an interest of anyone here, please get in touch with me to collaborate on this. And finally, sex, gender, and sexuality. This came up organically in all of my interviews. It was not part of my interview protocol. I didn't have any of these questions. But what I found is that all male participants mentioned relationships with women, and 2 specifically mentioned how white women tears can be weaponized against them as Black men. And this is not to say that they don't like white women. In fact, one of them is now married to a white woman, but I thought it was interesting that this came up. And a female participant also addressed this very issue with her son, who came to the US 4 weeks before I interviewed them. It also came up because across participant accounts, they were really curious how the US could be so understanding of gender expressions and different sexualities while having constraining views of race. They didn't understand how those two things could happen. And again, I think that much of this is cultural, but I thought it was interesting. And finally, well, I think I'll mention this point in the next slide, so I'll go continue on. So here I talk about my incongruent assumptions. Throughout this process, I kept reflective notes because I really wanted to interrogate my own views as a Black US American. And I say incongruent because the research, the data doesn't support the ideas that I had. And the first one is that IBAC from racially diverse countries would have a better understanding of US racial hierarchy. And so I'm thinking students from like Zimbabwe or Angola or South Africa, that they would understand and they would have a better time adjusting. That's not true. That is not true. So this tells me that the US really does have a unique brand of racism. Another thing I believed was that physical safety would be a vocal concern of IBAC men. In fact, none of them mention it. It was only the women who talked about a fear of physical safety, and specifically women whose husbands later joined them or their male children joined them. And lastly, I was very surprised that all of my participants were graduate students. For some reason, I thought it would be very difficult to recruit graduate students, even though the majority of Africans studying in the US are grad students. So that was a pleasant surprise. Thank you for, again, this opportunity. I will stop now, and I believe we'll be taking questions at the end. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And yes, we will take questions at the end. If you have any questions for Ashley, I encourage each of you to write it in a chat, and we'll go back to answer some of the questions that you would like to answer for Ashley. So Lisa, do you want to introduce Ting? You already introduced Ting.
I'll turn it over to Ting, who's representing the Global Migration SIG today. Ting, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Roy. And I will share my slide. Can you see my slide?
Mm-hmm. Yep,
okay,
we can.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. Thank you for spending the Friday with us. I know it's a busy time of the semester, so we appreciate that you're here with us. The work that I'm sharing is my recent emergent interest in Chinese international students, particularly the graduate student. But before I start, I have to acknowledge that I did my dissertation in education technology. So this is really, for me, a very fantastic learning opportunity, and I'm very honored to be invited to share my work in progress with you all here. And this is a collaborative team, so I have my co-author's name listed here. So my topic is marginalized, silenced, and struggled, understanding the plight of Chinese graduate teaching assistants in their awakening stories. So in order to present, I would like to highlight that my structure of today, and let me set up my time too, so to be 20 minutes. So I will introduce briefly of the background due to we only have 20 minutes together, and I will highlight the literature related to this topic. I will focus on the findings of the topic while briefly introduce the methodology and theory. Of course, we have time at the end for questions. So the context, as Ashley nicely pointed out, that international students numbers are rising in the United States, and particularly you can see over the 100 years or over this recent decades, we have a dramatic growth in international students. They are a phenomenon in higher education in the global in the globalization. And Chinese international students in particular have reached about 0.37 millions by 2020 to 2021. But Chinese international students are a special group. They are usually categorized in their country of origin, rather than thinking about the white and black dichotomy in the US racial discussions. And they are also seems to be a different group compared to Asian Americans due to the special social political tensions between China and the US. And due to COVID, there are also, stigma and racism, Asian hate toward them. So under this background, Chinese graduate teaching assistants are a part of these Chinese international students. They are maybe more modest in terms of their affluence family background, because a lot of them are on scholarship and they may have done their undergraduate studies in China. But they are very important to higher education because they play many different roles in higher education. They are supporting undergraduate and graduate courses, but they have this very a lot of marginalized identities, such as their gender, their age, their ethnicity, their race, and their special status being an employee. At the same time, they're also Chinese international students who just landed in this country not long ago. So in the research, GTA has been studied, and mostly for the teaching aspect or cognitive apprentice model that are being studied for their important roles in higher education. And research has found that more than 40% of program in the US actually higher GTAs, domestic or internationally. And international GTAs are common, but they have been found that they have struggles. GTA of color experience struggles. Black GTA found that research found that they have discrimination toward them, biases toward them, exploitation toward them, and of course, they are also sharing the systematic oppression or the racism, as we discuss in higher education research. Asian students, Asian GTAs are on general international students, on the other hand, and their plight and racism in the US. So looking at these two lines of literature, Chinese graduate students have been identified, have struggles such as immigrant status, their visa issues, their lack of support or social capital, discriminatory experiences, and their academic pressure because they're on an agenda, just like I have experienced. So Chinese graduate teaching assistants are this particular population. They are working in higher education. They have complications in their funding seeking in terms of advisor-advisee relationship, their institutional policy of their staying. Of course, they also, researchers have found that they have resistance, but they have grit and resilience in how they motivated to finish their study, being a double kind of role in terms of working, but also studying. So my research question is, what are the experience applied? Why their struggle? What are the struggle in their thinking and talking, the reflecting in the interviews? So I have in total recruited 21 Chinese graduate teaching assistants, and they have various majors, including majority from social science, but I also have several from STEM majors like science and education, science and engineering. So here is a table that I highlight the overall demographics of these participants, including their majors. So about half are social studies, but I also have some business and some STEM. And most of the students that I recruited are performing as graders or supporting GTAs, but some of them are independent instructors. And I have 76% of female, 23% of male. And then the average have spent 4.4 years in the United States. And their average age is 31 years old, even though we do see a wide spectrum here. The theory that I use is Bronfenbrenner's bioecological system in his later version. So Bronfenbrenner is a social psychologist from Cornell, and he's very influential in social studies in his systems. First version is talking about a micro, meso, and micro level systems and how that will impact the human development. But in his later version, he added on the exo level and chrono level, which is time and the interactions among groups. So if you look at this figure, it shows that an individual's development would be related to these individual level, sex, gender, faith, health, and micro level, like the school, their peers, the meso level, how these micro level systems interacting with each other will impact. For example, your advisor's relationship with other advisor may impact your GTA's well-being. And then the exo systems in terms of like mass media, how you watch a popular drama impact your thinking of your study, right? And then the micro level systems of the overall, like the racism, the United States current political environment, and the chrono system, including like the time spectrum, where if you are in 2020 or if you're in 2000, and how old you are could impact your thinking and the well-being in that particular development moment. So I used the standard coding, inductive and deductive coding, meaning going back to literature, going to the data, and using open coding, look at my interviews, mostly line by line, but also I look at chunks and themes at the same time. So I do put the codes into codebook, and also did some focus coding, looking at the cluster of the collapse of these codes, as well as using the focus coding to allow for themes to emerge. So briefly, there are the challenges that they face are in ways that they felt sometimes it's hard to explicitly tell what exactly it is. Multiple layers of struggle, which could be very hard to pronounce in terms of the struggle. And these complex systems from Bronfenbrenner helped me to see that there are factors such as their race, their language, their gender, their social class also matters. And I would like to highlight these factors along with the systems, the 5 systems, the micro, exo, meso, micro, and the chrono levels, such as their local, their micro level social cultural environments, the larger policies, and the cultural differences, and the institutional environment in these findings. So I will be briefly sharing one example of these findings, and hopefully we can have more discussions, and I'm very eager to learn from you as well. So the first finding is focused on micro level. Micro level factor in awakening stories, including their direct contacts in their immediate environment, such as their students, their advisors, and their peers. So Pearl shared, I felt that many undergraduate students, maybe they are still too young and I'm just their TA, not a formal professor, and not respectful. For example, one student emailed me to ask a question with no standard greeting words like hello or thank you. I consider these words to be basic manners to show respect. They may end the email with, please reply to my email as soon as possible. Would this be because I was just a TA, or would this because this student was an undergraduate student, and so they did not know the basic of email etiquette? Was it because I was not their real professor and I'm a female and Chinese? So in terms of this particular quote, Pearl expressed expects cultural humility from students, but students do not adhere to these expectations. That might be because students were unaware of how they viewed her teacher's identity status and treated her as their peer with a casual conversation style, which is normal in the low power distance US society. The idea of new racism helps explain this plight. New racism and off-the-record evolution of racial discrimination has created new ways of identifying and understanding racism. From Pearl's counts, students' disrespect is not expressed in an obvious way. Therefore, these uncomfortable encounters were not overt racism, but it might be quiet and unintentional microaggression, yet even more destructive at times. And using Bronfenbrenner lens, when talking about these disrespect from their peers, their students, many Chinese GTAs said they would commonly internalize. And Pearl, who felt disrespected by students, shared that she tried to see herself as a learner. So Bronfenbrenner's bioecological systems pointed out that human development, human as a main active role in the developing systems, they express this micro-level microaggression or environmental microaggression, as research has coined. And the next finding is meso-level. Meso-level factors in the awakening story include interactions between people in the microsystem, such as between Chinese GTA's advisor and the advisor's interaction with their colleagues, or between school, their peers' interactions and tension. Some of the shared story include how their advisor's role and their advisor's resource and intersection with their department impact their own experiences. For example, Shishi shared, even though my advisor was very supportive for me to be a Chinese GTA, he, being a Korean new faculty, did not have much resources to support me. So she felt that she has this only one financial source for her, and she needed that financial source, and she will do whatever that job requires. And I felt some of these, for example, working overtime, the disrespect and the tension, she would internalize and instead of voicing them up. So at this level, Bronfenbrenner's model offers a way of thinking about the context and their microsystems interactions, how their departmental faculty and the campus community can impact their ways of struggling. It can be a very complex plight, and this result in their various struggles, such as their job opportunities, academic success, and their finance situations as well. The third finding is exo-level. Exo-level factors in the awakening story include intersections in the formal and informal social structure, which do not themselves contain the GTA, but indirectly impact their microsystems. For example, the immigrant policy, the higher education activities. So some of the GTAs shared about how the superficial cultural events or the superficial procedural, like survey how you think about it, but did not really sincerely addressing their real concern. And they can't really articulate these in any of these occasions. And in these international day, they did not feel they're honored. So they felt also, for example, immigrant policies like F1 student status, even though some of them do rely on their teaching role or a financial need that emerge in their study, but because they're Chinese international students, they only allowed to work max of 20 hours, and sometimes they only get 10 hours or 15 hours on campus. This policy pressured them to not be able to work off campus because it's not legit, but then they work on campus, but they have limited opportunity that they couldn't work beyond this 20 hour. For example, one GTA, Ben, he said he secured a 10-hour GTA ship out of his department, but he already has 15 or which is combined would be more than 20 hours. So he couldn't take that GTA because the limitation of that policy. And then many activities and programs organized were seems caring, but they did not feel that it was a real individualized empathy toward them. So at this level, Bronfenbrenner's ecological perspective allows us to understand both their own plight, but also interacting with their institutional environmental context. So it is a complex interweaved complexity that they have to navigate in terms of this exo level complex situations. The number 4 finding is focused on the micro level. So micro level factors in their stories are related to larger social and political environment. So for example, Zoe, an engineering PhD student, said, in reality, most of our engineering PhD students are Asian students, and majority, I think more than 80% are like Chinese or Korean, and Chinese GTAs play a significant role in teaching large lecture style STEM courses. We are invisible labors that the many STEM professors and future hiring directors hired us to train the future STEM American workforce. But regardless the importance, Zoe faced many struggles, including being a minority on campus, and the employee rights were not necessarily protected, and she were not there to voice up these working overtime when teaching undergraduate courses. Because she grades large lectures, she experienced negative feedback from students. Students commented on his grading being too strict. And here could be a multi-layered factors of that, the fact that she's Chinese, and the fact that she has lots of gradings to do, and maybe also having complications between her relationship with the course instructor as well. And also the course instructor requires her to turn over the assignments very quickly, like 2 to 3 days. So she has to chunk the big time slots to grade these tests. So in terms of Bronfenbrenner's work on laying on the impact of social and cultural environments, we can see this political and social tensions of US wanted to grow their own. We want to grow our own tech force, but at the same time, STEM majors like engineering and computer science are still largely international GTAs oriented, or if GTA were majority of the GTA roles, and they are in this environment, they playing critical roles, yet their personal needs and wants were not necessarily being heard. Together, they create the plight that GTAs faced and voiced here. The last level is chrono level. Chrono level factors include how individuals felt that their individual changes interacted with their plight. So Jamie, a PhD in education, said, when I was in Beijing, I was a manager and a leader in the company. I had my apartment and car. I had a social status. It was not bad. But like many Chinese undergraduate students from unlike undergraduate students from wealthy family, I did not have enough saving or ask my parents to support my doctoral journey. And I'm in my 30s, even though my parents, even in my 30s, to get money from them to support study. So I quit my job, become a GTA is her only option. And now she is in the status of being an employee, but did not receive much respect. And also she has a very intense agenda of research. So, and then in the study, Jamie also talks about how her marital status, she's single and being a woman of over in the late 30s, and facing the tension of leftover lady in China, but also here in the dating market. So they face these multiple struggles because of their chronological transit. I know my time is up, so I'll be using 30 seconds to 1 minute to wrap up. The difficulty in the transition could be explained in their intersectionality, which were multiple aspects of the gender, race, their past experiences, their class as well when we think about at this level. So to conclude, I think the significance of studying Chinese GTA is very needed because it's a rarely explored area in their teaching roles, even though Chinese international students have attracted research attention in higher education. It will build and add on Chinese international students as an overall growing field. And also in this particular study, I extend the Bronfenbrenner theory from majorly to like child human development to this special group of adults and providing nuances in adult development. I also think it is important to think about Chinese graduate teaching assistants with their international student status, their Asian status, their being, different social classes. It's a diverse group. And also want to call for care and more attention for this special group to Chinese graduate teaching assistants in this particular population. So that is all. I didn't have my email there, but I can provide. Ashley has the email. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Huang, for a very fascinating topic on Chinese graduate teaching assistants. We're going to now turn it over to Q&A. So feel free to unmute yourself, and if you want to show a video, you're welcome to show a video. But just unmute yourself and introduce yourself, where you're from, and who and what question you would like to direct your question to. Johnny Woods, I know you just wrote something in the chat. Would you like to start off with a question?
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. I thought we didn't have the capacity to talk the way the webinar was structured, so I have my question in the chat. But actually, my question is directed to you. So I'm Johnny Woods. I'm a postdoc in the School of Education at Virginia Tech, and I do work around the experiences and outcomes for Black Sub-Saharan African students, and I believe Ashley is aware of that nature of my work. So I'm just asking some specific questions in terms of the data. Were there any issues in terms of how race play out in the students' own academic progress and their social interactions? And just to also know if there were anything specific in terms of how they navigated the challenges of COVID.
Yeah, thank you for those questions, Dr. Woods. Your first one, yes, there were a few examples about how race impacted their academics. A few of my participants talked about their relationship with their advisor and how these were very outspoken women and their advisors were not used to that. So they were used to, particularly the one that's in the economics, their professor was used to their advisees listening to what they say and doing exactly what they say. They were not used to someone asking questions or giving pushback or saying that there's a better or more effective way of doing that. And one of the other advisees had a conversation with her and she's like, "You're from Ghana, right? So what is it about Ghanaians where they feel like they can just say whatever they want?" And so that lets you know that it wasn't just the advisor, but also the people around the student that was surprised that she felt confident enough to speak out. Again, another participant decided that they wanted to change their major. I had one graduate student who came from an advertising background and decided to go back to school and get their master's in student affairs. And that was directly related to their experience as an undergraduate student feeling othered as they were a graduate student in Utah. And so they came to student affairs wanting to be the person that they wish they had, However, the more they learned and their experience as a master's student just showed them that, no, this is the way the US is. It doesn't matter if you're in Utah or if you're in Indiana, this is going to be your experience. And I also think with students, the example that Dr. Huang shared, I had some GAs also share that experience with the student. They weren't, is it because I'm close to their age, or it's because I'm not a professor, or they weren't sure. And in terms of COVID, it's very difficult to see the impact of COVID on this population. I think I had one participant who had to delay their start. They talk about issues with visas, the fear of leaving the US because they weren't sure if they would come back. But that is something that all international students had to face, although I do think in terms of embassy and wait times, it is different for African students. So that's what's coming off the top of my head. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Ashley. Jing Xia, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I don't have a question. I think mine is more some comments. I think those are both fascinating presentations and research. I am Qing Xia. I am from China myself. I have been in the US for about almost 30 years. Now I am faculty in the Institute for Global Health in our College of Osteopathic Medicine at Michigan State University. So I got my PhD in our education college at the Hill program, higher and adult lifelong education. So I think, Ting's presentation regarding using the theoretical framework to discuss Chinese GTs. And a couple of comments I'm thinking, because I've been here so long, so I pay attention. I'm also an advisor to our Chinese Student Scholars Association here. So, after experiencing almost a decade of rising, rapid rising of Chinese international students, or the peak time, I think Minnesota, those Big Ten universities all have those phenomena. MSU got close to 1,000 students per year for about a couple of years, few years. But this year, the drama is we have about 100 undergraduate new Chinese students. 100. So you think about the sharp contrast, and also quite a few faculty, particularly Chinese, origins, with Chinese origin, because they tend to recruit high caliber Chinese graduate students come to MSU to do research and do BGA, TA, right? But they have tremendous difficulties. So down the road, 5 years, if we want to do another research, the impact of the losing of the group of, let's see, talents in US higher education, we'll see what's the impact. It's already there. It's already there, at least temporarily, the difficulties being there. The other comments to Ashley is, I really think that this is a great research, and I'm thinking about, you made a comment about, the racial tensions in different countries are very different. That's absolutely true. I'm just, I watch a lot of news, of course, but looking at China even, China is quite open, the Chinese higher education to international students, particularly a lot of students from, let's see, Pakistan, India, Africa, right? You see those tensions in China, but I don't see any research myself. I didn't do a search, but I believe there are tensions there on the side of the globe. And, let alone here in the US, we still kind of, every day, we still grappling what's going on in this country, right? All these tensions. So I'm just thinking it's part of our, as international educators, the students are here. They are so many are pretty naive in a way in terms of how they look at United States, imagine about this ideal country, but when they are here, it's the contrast, the conflicts, it's just shocking. So what do we do? What do we how do we educate them? When we go recruit students to different countries, how do we address these issues? Those are very sensitive and sometimes maybe controversial, perspectives. I wouldn't think that the recruiters will tell the potential students saying, you're going to be in, sometimes you could be in grave danger, right? If you're on the street of Chicago in middle night, you could be robbed or killed, And there were tragedies we all heard about, particularly in the large group among Chinese students. Students were killed, either by under different circumstances. So I'm just thinking there are so many things to study, but yeah, it's so interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Would one of you guys want to respond to Ching Xia comments?
Yeah, Dr. Xia, thank you. I appreciate the comment on that, and I also agree that even though right now we are losing a lot of talents, especially Chinese international students, the point of due to COVID is dropping from the previous peak of enrollment. And my institution is witnessing a drastic drop as well. My institution is College of William Mary in Virginia. So that said, even though it is much less compared to the 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I think it, as the social political tension shifts or as the globalization deeps, we may still see a substantial amount of Chinese students and international students on US campuses. The question that you posed, the perspective question, how do we welcome them? How do we make sure that they are they're surprised, but not that surprised? We have systems that are prepared, can provide them support, can provide them care, can help them navigate the systems, is important. And there are implications from studies actually has done, and I have read. I think some of them, including educating ourselves, our colleagues, in terms of understanding the students that coming in, the international students' background, their culture as well. So it's a mutual learning experience as well. So thank you, Dr. Xia, for posing that comment.
Oh, thank you. I enjoy your presentations a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we have time for at least one more quick question. If anyone want to ask one more quick question. Again, this presentation is recorded, so we're happy to send you the URL at the conclusion of this brown bag webinar. I do want to mention that the Comparative and International Education Society will have their annual conference in this coming February 2023 in Washington, D.C. Our special interest group is hosting a very special 5th anniversary celebration as part of our special interest group as we celebrate since our SIG during the annual conference. And there are different ways to get involved with our SIG. If you're interested in getting more involved, I'm happy to add you to our listserv. We send out monthly newsletters, ways that you can get involved in terms of activities, events, programs. If you're interested, just feel free to reply back to the email, and I'm happy to add you to our listserv. Lisa, do you want to say something for your closing remarks?
Sure. Well, thanks again so much to our two presenters, Ashley and Ting, for, I think, really exceptional work. Just can't wait to read more about what you've been doing. And yes, if anyone is interested in learning more about the Global Migration SIG, we'll be continuing brown bags this year. Both Ting and I are officers and would love to speak with you about ways that you might like to volunteer or be involved. Ting has just put her email in the chat. I'll do the same. And you can also find us on LinkedIn if that's easier for you. And we're wishing everyone a wonderful weekend. Thanks so much for joining us. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. And thanks for joining in our first ever brown bag series. And we look forward to continuing this conversation with other brown bag activities this semester and next semester within our special interest group. Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Have a good weekend.